The Last Storyteller, the movie has been written by the writer, and then it's directed, and then it comes to the last storytelling, which is in the editing process.
The last draft of the screenplay is the first cut of the movie, and the final cut of the movie is the last draft of the script.
An editor can take a sequence that a director shot and reconfigure it in such a way that it becomes a whole different sequence, which is much more beneficial to the movie.
Bob Fosse referred to me as a collaborator on his movies, and I don't think there can be a greater compliment for an editor to be called a collaborator, to really to have that function.
And now, a word about dykes. I like dykes.
How could you say that?
Lenny was a biographical film of the comedian Lenny Bruce, who was often arrested for taking language to the legal limits of where it could go in the late 50s. The most wonderful thing that happened in it was near the end of the production. We had to show the film to the producer. And the script for the film was the best script I ever read. But we were having a problem. We hated the ending.
They'll continue.
You're trying to stop the information.
Hey, look, will you please remove this man from the courtroom?
It was just not coming together. When Lenny is dragged out of the courtroom, his life is effectively over. Between that period and the time of his death, there were 20 minutes of material. And I turned to Bob and I said, why don't we just kill the son of a bitch? I took out 2 reels of film. And I went straight from you can't stop the information to Lenny's body on the floor. And that was about the most exciting thing I've ever done in a cutting room. I mean, we just loved that.
The opening scene of Apocalypse, a good example of what you can achieve editorially that is not based on the original script. There were some collisions of images that occurred to Francis as he was shooting the film that were at variance with how he had planned to begin the film originally.
The trees being napalmed was originally shot for the surfing scene, which comes much later in the film.
There was a shot of jungle bursting into slow motion flames with helicopters flying at odd angles in slow motion through the frame. And when Francis saw that shot in dailies, which was, I think, simply done to record this explosion. It wasn't intended to use it in the finished film. But he looked at it and said, that's the film right there. This jungle, flames, helicopters.
The Martin Sheen character was one that was shaped very significantly in the editing room. The film itself was shot with the idea that there would be a narrative glue to hold the film together. What exactly that glue was and who the character of the narrator really was really not shaped until well into the post-production process.
Willard punches the mirror, blood comes out of his hand. All of this is really happening. That's real blood. That's Marty Sheen. None of that was intended to happen. That was just Francis saying, Marty, let's shoot an improvisation with you trapped in your room and what is going to happen.
I think as we worked on the film, we realized that the film itself was in its own strange way a kind of modern opera. And the reality of dealing just in the beginning with the Martin Sheen character was not sufficient to give the audience not only the emotional state with which to enter the film, but the visual iconography of the film itself.
Going through the dailies of the film, I collected a number of images of the Cambodian heads, burning images from the end, and worked them in through a series of multi-level dissolves with the burning napalm and the helicopters flying through, and then images of Willard's room and Willard asleep, and he's trapped in this nightmare. You have been hearing helicopter sounds, and now you see this ceiling fan, and what you're hearing is the whap, 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 whap sound of a helicopter. Is that coming from his dream? Is it a reality? Is somehow that sound coming from the fan? I remember when I was assembling those images, almost jumping away from the editing machine when I put that sound with that image, because it seemed to me that that fan was making that sound. even though I knew it was impossible. And that if it was convincing me who was doing it, it surely would convince others. Now they begin to coalesce, and they turn into a real helicopter coming from a fan. No. And then you hear a real helicopter fly over the room. Willard gets up out of bed, goes over to the window and says,
Saigon. Shit.
All of that, the narration and the helicopter flying over and the napalm jungle, is concocted into something that is a powerful beginning to a film, not only powerful in and of itself, but powerful in the way that it sets the stage for the journey that this particular film is going to take.
Obviously, great directors give you great material to work with, but the ultimate film that you see is the edited version, and it's the editor is greatly responsible for that.
I find my work absolutely fascinating and absorbing. I sat down to work, and 30 years went by without my noticing it.
It's true. When I go into an editing room in the morning, I edit. My assistant has to remind me it's lunchtime. Or Steven has to come in and say, hey, Mike, why don't you stop for a while or something? Because time goes by like that. You're building a whole other world. You're building a whole construct.
There's a joy on one level in that it's very much like putting a puzzle together. I have thousands and thousands of pieces, and how do I tell the story? And this goes before that, no, that doesn't. Or actually, I only need half of that.
The job is not unlike the Talmudic scholar who goes and sits and argues about the book over and over again, always coming up with new answers that are just more subtly refined than the last answer.
To sit in a theater at a preview and to hear an audience laugh at that moment when you expect to laugh and it comes back at you, or to hear an audience shuffling and crying because it's so sad and you expect that moment to really happen that way, that's so marvelous. It tells you what power we have.
I believe in people's being able to learn, because otherwise, what's the point? We're all going to, be past one of these days. And how are we going to take this fantastic thing called film and motion pictures and storytelling unless we pass it on and teach people how to do it?